And we are live with another episode of the Keeg Talks. Today, the Keeg Talks Black Characters in Fiction, which sounds repetitive every time I do it. All characters are fiction, right? I guess. But I'm your host, Dimithri Perera. We are here to talk about this. If you're watching us live, you can watch us on twitch.tv/The Keeg Show or youtube.com/The Keeg Show. Or maybe you're listening to the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. If you're watching us live, you can see who my awesome guests are. If you can't see us live, let me introduce them, because you can't see them. First, we got newcomer to the Keeg, first-time guest, but I'm a big fan of her horror content. We got Bree, a.k.a. Bree Hearts Horror. Bree, how you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing good. I love your content, even though I get scared with horror.
I feel like that happens a lot with people who follow me. Like, they want to just see me talk about horror movies, but not necessarily maybe watch them themselves.
I'm the type, I get scared really easily, so then I'll just go on Wikipedia and I'll just look up like movie plots, and I'll be like, okay, so that's what happens in Nightmare on Elm Street. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
And then, like, maybe every so often I'll watch like a clip on YouTube of like that mannequin being pulled through the window at the end of Nightmare. So I'm glad that you're on here, and I'm glad that we could make today work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same.
We also got Ninja Turtles fan, just Avatar fan, which I just found out right now. We got Johnson, aka Johnson is Lovely. Johnson, what's up?
I wear a lot of hats, and I'm a fan of a lot of things, but I mean, yeah, Ninja Turtles is the thing that I'm most known for over on the socials. But fun fact, I actually got my start on TikTok doing Avatar: The Last Airbender fan castings. Not too many people actually know that about me.
Yeah.
So if you spend a solid half an hour scrolling down my page, you'll find those old videos there because I never deleted them.
Yeah. Quick question: have you thought about which Ninja Turtle is which element?
Oh, I absolutely have. I'm fairly certain I've done a video about that, but I mean, I said Leonardo is water, Michelangelo is air, Donatello is fire, hot take, and Raphael is earth.
That is a hot take. That's not what I would have thought Raph was fire.
There's actually one thing about it, because like obviously there was like a really big thing where Raphael was kind of like playing with fire in the 2012 show. But before that, Donatello canonically could bend lightning in one of the Ninja Turtle video games from back in the day. And it was one of the coolest things that I've ever seen in any media format.
Okay, all right. That's making me think a little bit, but okay. I'm going to have to think about that one. George was nodding his head. We got George T, GM Time. What's up, man?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, were you nodding your head with Johnson's Avatar? And
I was 1,000%, because I think if you just think of like their personalities, especially like the hard-headedness with the earthbending and like
exactly, Raphael and Toph are the same person.
Yeah, yeah. And when you think about like the firebending isn't just rage, but it's also that passion and having that, you know, that inner fire, not just the rage. So you're like, okay, all right, I can get there.
Yeah, and I can buy that electronics is fire.
Mm-hmm.
You know, almost even mythologically speaking. All right, okay.
And anybody who says Mikey's not air is just a liar.
Mikey's definitely air. Yeah, Bree,
air surfing saying cowabunga.
What'd you say?
I said surfing on air and like saying cowabunga.
Oh, for sure. Bree, are you a Ninja Turtles fan?
I sadly have never really like watched a lot of it. I know there was like a movie that came out last year that I heard was really good, so I do want to check that one out, but I don't know anything past like their names, to be honest, sadly. I feel like I would like it though.
Yeah.
I say we did a whole show about that.
Okay.
Yeah, we did
not too long ago, didn't we?
Yeah, on the Mutant Mayhem that came out.
Okay.
I want to talk. I mean, the subject of this episode is just black characters in fiction, but I want to rewind the clock a little bit into back when you guys were kids growing up. Now, I grew up in the 90s, and I'm just speaking from my own experience, sort of on the outside looking in. '90s were a little bit different. 2000s were a little bit different. But were there shows that stood out to you guys? Either shows or characters like growing up that really spoke to you on that level?
I know for me this isn't horror related, but I loved
You don't have to
Sister.
stick, you don't have to stick to horror.
Okay.
You do you.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah. Sister was like a huge one for me. Like
Love it.
because a lot of people when I was younger said I looked similar to Tia and Tamara, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think we just both are light skin and have curly hair, but it was kind of cool because I did feel like I saw someone similar looking to me on television. So I loved that show and I loved those characters so much.
I was rewatching clips from that earlier, and shout outs to Jack A. Harris because she
Mhm.
carried that show
Yes.
for
Oh
the
my God.
longest time.
Yes, I loved that character so much too.
I remember Sister, and Marcus.
Mm.
Classic next door neighbor trope with sitcoms. George is a big sitcom person.
Yeah, and their brother was in in Smart Guy.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that whole family was representing. And honestly, when you said Sister, like it unlocked like a whole category of show, because like I had written down like all these examples of like black characters in my childhood, and like that whole genre of shows that I don't want to. It felt like we're specifically marketed to black kids. Like,
Mhm.
you know what I mean? Like you watch Sister, you're like, that's for us. You watch Smart Guy,
Oh,
you're
yeah.
like, that's my brother and me, Cousin Skeeter. Like there were all these shows, but at the same time, I feel like, and I know negatives a little bit later on, but it felt like those were different than I want to say like Gen Pop shows. Like if you're watching My Brother and Me, you're a black kid. And that's for you and the language that they use. But maybe you're watching, I don't know, like I want to say All That, and there was like, oh, there's Keenan and Kel for us,
Yeah.
and that's
Mhm.
those are the ones for us, and or you're the best friend, you're the black best friend, like Gerald or Vince from Recess.
By the
Mhm.
way, I said Marcus. I meant Roger. Go home, Roger. From
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
because
Sister,
Marcus
Sister.
Houston played it. Is like,
Yeah.
we understood what you meant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, you know, kind of springboarding off of what George was just talking about, because I mean, I was right there at the cusp of the end of the '90s and at the beginning of the 2000s. So it's kind of like a happy medium, you know, like between kind of the generational shift. And for me, it was one of those things where I look back at like at a lot of those characters, like Keenan and Kel, who were a huge influence on me, and you know, just how like they really kind of shaped the comedy duo landscape. Because you know, without them, there's no Drake and Josh, there's no Zach and Cody in terms of that style of television show. So to kind of bounce off of what George was talking about, there's like, yes, those were the black shows, but they were really kind of testing the waters and really, you know, like laying down the foundation work for, you know, what would go on to, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on which way you think about it, be, you know, the bigger, more successful shows. Was like later down the road in terms of, you know, figuring out what worked and what didn't. I was also a big fan of, obviously, you know, Living Single. I actually just finished rewatching that show a couple of years ago, and just falling in love with those characters all over again was fantastic. I'm going to stick to just this one section of this show's universe from a different world. It was a spinoff of The Cosby Show. We don't really need to get into that, say like the, you know, like the original show or, you know, anything like in regards to that. But that universe is like with those characters being focused on black education, going to college, and, you know, just entering the next step of that transition period between, you know, adolescence into full-blown adulthood. Some of the best characters I've ever seen. And yeah, Cree Summer was in that show too. For a lot of people, don't remember that.
Cree Summers was in everything. Like the list of people that I was making, I was like, I just put everything Cree Summers.
Absolutely
everywhere.
Cree Summers did a lot of voices. George, what are some characters that Cree Summers did?
Well, she did like Susie from Rugrats. She also did, I think her name was Miranda on As Told by Ginger.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she did a lot of them. She was also, and the reason I brought her up, she was also Freddie on A Different World, one of my childhood crushes. By she did a lot of them. Like I'd have
from Codename Kids Next Door.
Yeah, number 5. Yeah, she did a whole lot. One of the other things
Yep.
was and forget your name, is it John
Johnson.
Johnson? Sorry, I apologize. So he had brought up like more grown up shows like Living Single and things like Different Worlds, and especially as a kid, as a black male kid, there were a lot of characters on TV. Like it was, I'll say, rare to see like a black man in like a very strong position, and so they really stuck out. Like Jordy LaForge or like Eugene from the show The Practice was like a very strong black man who like domineered. Like he, I just remember him sticking out because it was his intellect. Like he was better than everybody else, and it wasn't because he was like gang dealer. It wasn't because he was big and he could have hurt people, but he didn't use the law. He used his brain. And Dule Hill from West Wing, characters like that where they weren't the stereotype, but they were still very strong. And also Jon Stewart, obviously Jon Stewart, the Green Lantern.
Yeah, it's funny that you say Jon Stewart because there's Jon Stewart Green Lantern, and then there's also Daily Show with Jon Stewart.
Very funny anecdote. Straight up, no lie, I swear to God, me and my wife had a 3 to 5 minute conversation about Jon Stewart, and we were talking about different Jon Stewarts.
That is hilarious.
That's amazing.
And we're just having this really casual conversation, and we're driving, and we're talking about how much influence he had on the medium and how much of a groundbreaker he was. and we were going on, and I was like, yeah. And a lot of people like they talk about his predecessor a lot, but I really thought he paved the way. And I said something about like African American, and my wife was like, and I was like, yeah, he really paved the way. I really looked up to him as a black man. She's like, why? What about? Because she's white. She's like, what? Like she's trying to broach this subject and be like, is there some sort of connection between black people and Jon Stewart that I don't get? And I was like, yeah. And but it wasn't until I said he wasn't invented till 1970 something, and a lot of people don't get that. And she was like, what do you mean by invented? Like, do you mean born? And I was like, you can look at it that way. He's the first black Green Lantern. And she's like, hold up.
That people don't talk about that when it comes to interracial relationships. People don't talk about the fact that you guys could be talking about two different Jon Stewarts,
Yeah.
And that's a big hurdle for interracial relationships.
There's like these little cultural things of like, I'm like, what the F is a pierogi? She's like, what?
Yeah. I don't even know. I can't even, what is a pierogi?
She says she's told me lots of times. It goes out of my brain every single time. I think it's the white people dumpling, but I don't know.
Oh, okay. What? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I think it's made out of potatoes. I'm gonna get canceled for saying that.
We mentioned the Cosby Show and A Different World and whatnot. There's two 90s shows that stand out to me personally is Family Matters and Fresh Prince.
Of course.
Do you guys have strong feelings about either or?
I have strong feelings about both. Mm-hmm. And actually, no, go ahead, Bree. You were about to say something?
I've never fully seen Family Matters, but Fresh Prince, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like that show is just beloved by everyone, regardless of like your race. Like, I think it's just one of those shows that just everyone can find something that they like about it. And so, yeah, I mean, I love that show.
Yeah, springboarding off of that, it definitely transcended, being, that one black show to, being, just one of those, just like beloved, just like classic, just one of those beloved classics in general. And I mean, it's really crazy to think about when you specifically said, Dimithri, between Family Matters and like in The Fresh Prince, because I mean, it's just like between Will Smith, the character, and, Steve Urkel, those were probably, like the two biggest, is like there was a definite cultural shift in terms of perceptions of black people and between what cool and what funny could be in terms of watching those two guys on TV. And it's like, we got to give hats off to both Will and Jaleel White in terms of what they really were doing back then, because they were both trailblazers.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say too, I watched this like multi-part documentary about sitcoms because I also really like sitcoms and the history of them. And I remember in it they were talking about like Carlton kind of being maybe one of the early like black nerd type of characters and how he wasn't just like, maybe a stereotype of what people thought black guys were supposed to be like. Um, and obviously Carlton is one of like the most outside of maybe like Will, one of the more like well-known characters from that show too.
Carlton low key carried the second half of Fresh Prince of Bel Air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has a dance, like, and they said on Ted Lasso, he did like this whole soliloquy about it. He was like, all around the world, if anybody is doing this, you know exactly who it is, you know what they're doing, what show it's from. He's like, no matter where you are around the world.
Here's
And
just,
what,
I wanted to add to that is that don't tell Fortnite that because Fortnite won't accept it because Fortnite I don't know if you guys know about this controversy. Fortnite did an emote of the Carlton dance, but they wouldn't pay Alfonso Ribeiro any money because they said it's not the Carlton dance. You prove to me that it's your dance, and he lost in court because I guess Bruce Springsteen and what's her name?
Courtney Cox.
Courtney Cox did the dance in a music video, which is where Alfonso took it. But it really reached everybody through Carlton.
Yeah.
And Fortnite was like,
I mean,
we don't know
Fortnite's had a history of doing that because there was like a really big guy on social media whose dance got appropriated in that game as well too. I forget the original creator's name, but I mean, he did the whole thing to "Take on Me." It's like where it's him and a bunch of guys just like marching down sidewalks and they're all doing the same dance movement.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Marlon Webb? Was it Marlon Webb?
It might be. Like I
Okay.
said, the name just like really escapes me for right now. So I apologize, but I mean, just like understand that was like Fortnite's been doing that for a hot minute.
Fortnite
And
takes a lot from black culture, and they don't pay the right people. Like the Millie Rock, like all those dance moves, and they're like, nah, you don't own it.
that's what corporations do.
Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to bring up though about like Family Matters and Fresh Prince that I noticed that they did. And earlier I brought up like how there's like this whole categories of those shows where like they're like black shows, and it was one of the few shows where like if somebody was like, oh, Family Matters, people wouldn't think it's a black show. How I always make this joke or say this thing like if there's two black characters and they're not related, like people are like, oh, that's a black show. If there are two black characters on there, and it was a shock when Winston and Coach were on the same show and it was a black show. Because and I also make the joke that's why they had to get them both off because it started becoming a black show. That's there. With CC, people are like, but like I feel like those two shows were able to transcend that fact where people were just like, oh, that's a family show. What's Fresh Prince about? Oh, that's a family show. Same thing with the Cosbys. We're like, oh, it's about a family because they were able to hit that zeitgeist and put our culture out there and say like, hey, and I think they did a big job of normalizing. Now, there's also that other side of maybe, I don't want to say creating a stereotype or maybe boxing in people like that becomes what a cool black guy is or that becomes what a nerdy black guy is, and we all have to fit those. But kudos to them for putting it out there and at least making it to regular culture.
There's something I want to point out, and I want to know you guys' thoughts. George, you brought up a good point about if you have multiple black people on a show, it becomes a black show. But there's also this added thing of what I call, maybe there's a better name for this, the Flintstone vitamin theory, which is what I have. So Flintstone's vitamins, when they first came out, like each vitamin was a different character and it was different shapes, right? But they either had only Betty or only Wilma. And I forget which one it was. And I'm trying to like find the information on it. But they only allowed Betty or Wilma, one or the other, because they looked too similar. You can have Dino.
I think I get what you're getting at.
Dino's a dinosaur shape. Wilma and Betty are both women shaped, so you can only have one. So what I call the Flintstone vitamin theory is that you have to have all these characters look different, right? On a show when you're creating a whole cast. Problem is, mainstream America considers like every white person to look different, but considers every black character to look the same. So you can have like all those like brunette guys that are on American Horror Story that all look the same, but they're different enough that they can all be on the show. But when you have two black characters, they look the same, so you can only have one vitamin.
That's why Big Bang Theory only has Raj.
Yeah.
That's why Big Bang Theory has Raj. They don't have a black guy, because if they had a black guy, also they'd be like, whoa, too much. We have all these very different white guys. You're like,
I can also imagine certain people in America being like, so where in Africa is India?
And in fact, I think it was last year I made a video about Raj on Big Bang Theory not liking him. And I think you remember, Dimithri, it was like a whole nasty thing. And I think it was actually you that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was you that commented, was like, because I think I said something like, oh, I don't like that, or, they could have at least had like a black character in passing or something like that. And I think it was you that was like, I'm kind of glad they don't have a black character, because they would be horribly racist to him the same way that they are to Raj. And we could see Howard making fried chicken jokes, or like gang violence jokes. And we're like, well, maybe we don't need that. Maybe we don't need that in Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory could not tackle race whatsoever. And I don't know whether they'd be making fried chicken jokes with a black character. They would do something wrong. But there's a weird way that the cultural zeitgeist deals with different racial groups and how they make fun, or how they're allowed to make fun publicly. Yeah. Rod was a punching bag.
I'm sure if we look back at enough Big Bang Theory episodes, we'd find at least one episode of one of those characters disguising themselves in an overdone 70s afro, which is like, the epitome of, making fun of black people's features.
Yeah.
Without, like immediately pointing it to skin color or be something else that's physical.
Yeah. With that Flintstone vitamin theory, I want to transition to character archetypes, because when it comes to when we bring up Carlton and Urkel, what I think works really well with the characters is the 90s really started to be like, well, the only way we can expand our view on all the different types of characters that can be represented, you have to have like the full, like the Fresh Prince and the Family Matters to completely expand what we think of, let's just say, black characters, right? So like Carlton and Urkel are two completely different nerds, and they're not confused with each other. You guys get what I don't know whether I'm saying that correctly, but like only through the saturation can we explore all these different types. Otherwise, there's a jock, there's a nerd, and they all like are very one note. But like in the 90s, we kind of started to see more of a expansion on that.
Someone has to break down the door so everybody else can run in before they close it.
Exactly. In fact, what's funny? I made a video on Hey Arnold, and I'll talk about like where they would be in the future. And I said Gerald would be like, a publicity manager for like podcasts or something like that. And somebody was like, well, what about athleticism? Like, being an athlete, because he does athleticism and stuff like that. And I was like, I liked that on Hey Arnold. Like, yeah, Gerald was seen to be a good athlete, but the more prominent thing was him being a figure to me. And I don't want to put them in that box of like separating him from Vince LaSalle from Recess, where Vince was like, that was his identity, and that's what Vince is good at. But Gerald at least got two things where he was like, I can make the ball swish, but also poetry and being able to storytell.
Was that Gerald's
thing? It's really crazy.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah, he was the storyteller. Whenever there was like a kid that they needed to tell a story about, like Sid would give him the intro, and then he'd be like, the story of the stoop kid, or the story of the pigeon man. Like that was also his thing.
Yeah, they borrowed a lot of beats from like kind of like those blaxploitation films, with how they would always like, let me rap to you real quick, because Hey Arnold was kind of set in an urban environment like that. That was a really cool point. And bouncing off of that also how you were talking about how that commenter said that about Gerald to you. That made me think about that viral post that happened where somebody drew the Rugrats like 20 years later, like into adulthood. And there was this whole thing that happened. There was a lot of controversy about it, because out of all the Rugrats, they freaking drew Susie Carmichael as a single black mother. and it was just like it was absolutely insane. It was like the backlash was going hilariously crazy in the comment section because just like you had Tommy and Kimmy still together. They paired like Chucky with Lillian and just like all this other stuff. And then it's like you just see Susie with 3 little kids and no man standing right behind her. So I just first of all, if any of these kids are going to be a single mom, it's Angelica. Let's be expeditiously for real right now. And not to say that she can't keep a man. Maybe it's by her own choice.
No, she can't. And we all know it.
She would have to marry someone that was similar like to her dad because she's very similar to her mom. She needs someone that she could like walk all over, I think.
Yeah. Bree, question for you. Were there any like Black women characters like growing up that like really stood out to you?
I was thinking too while we were talking about well, I was talking about Sister, but even like because I was born in 94, so I kind of was obviously younger in the late 90s, and so I think I can't remember when Sister came out, but I would watch like reruns mostly. But growing up, I also really loved That's So Raven, because well, for a couple of reasons. I love that show because the cast obviously was majority Black, and it was kind of funny because it was like an inverse of how it usually is with like there was like a token white friend instead of like the token Black friend with like Chelsea. And I also appreciated that they had a whole episode about racism, and had the white character also trying to understand, like, because obviously she can't relate to her Black friends, what it's like. And along with that too, because I was like a big Disney Channel kid, I also loved The Proud Family and how that was again also a very predominantly Black show. And so like those 2 shows, I think especially like when I was around like 6, 7, 8, whenever they were on, were very important to me, and like I gravitated towards them for sure.
Yeah. That's So Raven was super funny.
Mm-hmm.
And like my sister and I would always be my sister would do this like freeze frame, like looking into the future, and I would pretend like I was the camera, and I would like do like a 180 and then go into her eye.
Mm-hmm.
It would just be like the funniest thing. Raven Simone was really good in that, and I wish she did more comedy and like got more roles. Just like I wish Jaleel White got more roles after Steve Urkel. I think Jaleel White, I mean, and Raven obviously are great comedic minds. I thought Jaleel White was one of the best comedic minds, and could have done so much more. Like I don't know.
Am I allowed to ask a question or bring a question up?
Yeah.
Because like something that Bree had brought up was like them doing an episode on racism, and I wanted to see how like you guys felt about like a racism episode on a show, like that shows would do, especially in the 90s and 2000s. Because to me, I feel like they were very hit and miss, where either it would be like there was no in between. Either it's like, yes, are you guys taking notes? That's how it be, or it's one of those eye roll, like that's not what it looks like. No white kid's gonna walk up and like kick over your chair just because you're Black. You know, like they would have certain episodes where like maybe there's a very very overt white kid who like you're like, well, we're not really facing at 10 years old, I'm not facing clan level racism, but you know, there are types of discrimination. So I don't know how you guys feel about like the very special episodes that they would have. Or even now.
I feel like, well, just thinking about the That's a Raven one, because I have recently been rewatching that show again. So like that one's kind of fresher in my mind. I do feel like that episode, I mean, it's very like, I think, what's the word? Like very like hand holding you through it, but it's also for kids. So like it makes sense. But I do think that that episode, because it is just focused on like that very real racism that does exist when you're trying to get a job, and they just, you know, they can't outright say they're not hiring you because you're of your race, but like that's what happens in the episode of That's So Raven with the racist store manager or whatever. But I do feel like that episode, because I did rewatch it not that long ago, like I do feel like it has aged pretty well, and it doesn't feel like just too far off from like the realism of a situation like that, in my opinion. But I do think that like if I went back and rewatched some sitcom episodes and like special episodes, that a lot of them, or not a lot of them, but some of them just, I think they probably tried, but I think it also has a lot to do with who's behind, like who's writing the episode too. Like
yes.
if it's a racism episode about like racism towards Black people, if a white person's writing it, like obviously they can't really experience something like that. So it may not come across as genuine as if like a Black person wrote an episode like that.
Yeah. And if I could springboard off of that, going off of what Bree said, who's in the writer's room is a very big, important key factor into that. And also, it's just going back to what you said earlier, George, about how, sometimes things can be maybe portrayed a little over the top. I feel like that sometimes is done intentionally because of how often gaslighting plays into, kind of letting like the racism get played off for like a laugh or, not be taken as seriously. Because you'll look at it as excuse me, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Got a little too excited. But it's one of those things where you look at it and it's just like, yeah, no, it's like, like not, like dumping a drink or like food. I was like on a Black person's head in lunch class, but I mean, it's just like, it can be something very akin to that. It's like you kind of need those extreme visuals to kind of pull people in and really kind of nail the point home. But for me, the one that always stands out to me that I always go back to because I always see viral clips of it is the Static Shock episode from its first season. And I mean, that is honestly one of the best ones that was ever done, in my personal opinion, because it's just like, it's the context of, well, what does a generational gap in terms of racism actually look like? And so you have Virgil, who's best friends with Richie, and everything seems cool because we've been introduced to Richie for well over 10 episodes at this point. And just like, we have this connection to that character, just like Virgil does. And so when we take it out of the context of Virgil's lens and put it under what is life like at Richie's home, and just like, you can cut that tension with a butter knife. And it is, I mean, it was a very sad thing to experience through Virgil's eyes because he didn't want to believe it at first. He's just like, come on, he's like, your dad's just, I say, like, it's just being a hard ass. Sorry if I can't really swear like that, but
No,
I mean,
cool.
it's like, and that's a relatable thing because I mean, just is like, if you have like that more strict Black parent growing up, just like it's like there's a lot of things that you can kind of internalize, and then be like, well, that's not. It's like, I'm not reading too much into this because I mean, all parents are like that, right? But then you just start feeling those microaggressions building up. And then you finally hear Richie's dad snapping off about his kind.
Yeah.
And that's what makes Virgil leave. And then shout outs to Richie, though, for being, just like the one to break that generational curse within his own family and stand up to his father in that episode, because that is also something that, more people need to kind of see in terms of having those tough conversations and like really kind of breaking down those barriers.
Yeah. Quick synopsis just for anyone who needs to fill in the gaps. Virgil is static, staying over at his white friend's house. Richie is his best friend. He's white. And so Richie's father, also white, has a problem with that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember that episode. Very specifically. I remember the Family Matters episode where, and I still remember this as a child. Eddie, the son of the family, drives in the wrong neighborhood.
Yeah.
And Carl Winslow, Eddie's father, is a cop. Chicago. It takes place in Chicago. So Carl is a Chicago cop and pretty high up. I think he's like a sergeant or something. And two white cops, one who's like a veteran white cop and the other one is a young new rookie, pull Eddie over for being in the wrong neighborhood, and they arrest him, I think. And so Carl...
They harass him and they cuff him.
Yeah. And so Carl at first is like, what did you do? Because Eddie also had like... Eddie made mistakes. Nothing
It's Eddie.
bad. Eddie was not bad. And Eddie goes on later and becomes a cop. But Carl really can't wrap his mind around like this bad cop. Eddie must have done something wrong. And at the end, there's a great scene where Carl confronts the cops in like a diner. And you can find that online. The problem is it's still a thing, right? It's been 30 years.
They did an episode like that on Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I haven't seen
They had multiple. Sorry, go on.
I was just gonna say that some people thought they had certain things to say about it. I thought that was a well done episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine as a black cop, and not only did they have that, but they had there's the seminal episode with Terry Crews' character getting stopped, and he's not dressed the way that he is and lives in a nice neighborhood, and they go after him. But there's also one where, especially in season 8, where they just laid out like the barriers that somebody faces in order to stop a bad racist cop, where there was an incident where somebody, was arrested and it was like clearly this is racism. And then like one of the high chief of police just outlined point by point by point why they were like, nobody's going to do anything about this racism because this is how the system works. And I like how blunt they were about it, where they were like, yeah, and I'm one of the good ones. Like, and they kept saying that to the episode. It was like, yeah, I'm one of the good ones. Like, don't say that. Nobody likes you to say that. Later on, the lady explains everything. She's like, and I'm one of the good ones. And the girl looks over at him. He's like, I hear it.
Yeah. I just created a little graph. The problem with the very special episodes is almost like intensity on one like axis and pointedness on another, right? There's like they try to go too small or try to go too large, or it's not pointed enough at the actual issue. It's more like some people just don't like it when other people look different, and that's not pointed enough. That's and then Brooklyn Nine-Nine going very pointed sometimes also turns away certain people who don't want it to be as pointed, so it's very interesting that you guys bring all that up. What was I gonna say? Let's talk about characters you do like from any time period, because I want to hear about the characters that really resonate with you guys. My just real quick, I love Storm. I'm just throwing that out there. Storm to me I love Storm.
That's cool. If we're going to talk about from any time period, this is going to be a really weird one that nobody's really going to expect for me to say for my brand.
Yeah.
And the character has just recently been reintroduced as black, or like it's officially been confirmed after all this time. But I'm going for the character of Betty Boop. And so for those of you unfamiliar, Betty Boop is a old black and white cartoon from the Rubber Hose animation era. You can find a bunch of her old shorts like out there on the interwebs. She's like one of those classic cartoon icons. She was like really like one of the foundation pieces, like before Bugs Bunny. It was like around the Mickey Mouse time. Like just like Betty Boop was one of those people. Like, and they've made several parodies of her. There's a parody of her in that show Drawn Together that came out in the 90s that a lot of people have like a really big cult following about. But I say her because one, they've just reintroduced the Betty Boop character and brand as a Broadway show, and she's being portrayed by a black woman in the show, which is really astounding to me. And I have a very personal connection to Betty Boop because my grandmother, that was her favorite fictional character of all time. And I remember going to her house. She had this glass display case filled with all of these little Betty Boop vinyl dolls, miniatures, bobbleheads. Like one of the first times I was ever introduced to somebody with like a fixation about something was my grandmother, and it was with Betty Boop.
That's adorable. I like that. And just me being me and having to look everything up all the time ever. Like I have my computer in front of me. I typed in Betty Boop black, and it was like, yeah, the issue is like she was in black and white, and like, but she was supposed to be based off somebody who was light skinned. So that if you only have the color black and the color white to draw a character, like it's gonna look like Betty Boop. A light skinned person looks like Betty Boop. I was like, oh, all right.
American culture in general has this fascination with the binary, of course, but also binary when it comes to race. And it's generally speaking, for the longest time, it's like there were two races in America, white and black, and like that's it. And even when you take colorism into account, like how light can you get before it becomes white, and things are way more complicated back then, but they didn't address it. But then they're addressing the complications now, and we see that because Johnson, I thought you were going to bring up April O'Neil.
Oh, I mean, April O'Neil is definitely also up there. Please don't get me wrong. Really, honestly, I can say April O'Neil and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles because they are canonically black in the Power Rangers crossover. Shout outs to Dan Mora and all of those guys. But yeah, I mean, so trying to choose my words wisely here. So it was never officially confirmed by Eastman or Laird if April was supposed to be, I was about to say, a black woman in the original Mirage comics. That's a, all we know is that it was potentially adapted. It was like April's design was essentially based off of Kevin Eastman's wife at the time, who I believe was biracial. I still can't get confirmation on that. I remember reading that somewhere, but that article has mysteriously disappeared every time I try to go back and fact check myself when I say that. But I mean, watching the evolution of April O'Neil throughout the years and how we hit 2018 and there's this drastic change to her character design and rise of the TMNT, and subsequently now her immediate next interpretation in Mutant Mayhem / Tales of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and we've seemed to have gone for what what most people will just call just like the woke check or the diversity check. But I mean, April O'Neil is one of those characters where it's never really factored in or mattered one way or the other. Because I mean, just like her whole thing is she's either the news reporter or she is an employee that works for Baxter Stockman, and she meets 4 talking turtles, and that could literally be anybody. And I have no problem if they want to just like continue to explore April O'Neil through other ethnicities and give other people a chance to share their experiences with intros. But I'm definitely happy for right now in terms of the black representation that we get with her, because shout outs to Catherine Graham, who voiced Rise April. Honestly, a top 2 interpretation and not 2 in my opinion. And also shout outs to Iowa Debris, who is the current April O'Neil proper.
Io's been killing it, by the way.
Oh my god, yeah, I love her.
Yeah. Bree, were you gonna say something?
Well, just thinking about like characters, I was thinking it's kind of like not random, but because I don't talk about video games really ever on my TikTok because I don't really play a lot of video games, but one character from a video game that is really important to me is from the Walking Dead game, specifically season 1, the character of Lee, who is like the main protagonist. And also Clementine, which is what my other cat's named after, is the little girl in that game. But
Aww,
yeah.
cool.
But Lee, I like remember playing that game. That's the only video game I've ever cried over because, like, spoiler, I guess if you haven't played the video game, like Lee dies at the end of season 1. And I remember I just loved his character because I think at the beginning he's going to jail for killing the husband or the guy that his wife was like cheating on him with or something like that. So he's kind of like, the first time we see him, he's like a criminal, but throughout the whole season of that game, you see that he's just misunderstood and a very like caring, sweet guy. So that when he finally gets bitten by a walker and then dies, it is so devastating. And I fell in love with that game because of that character. And so, I don't know. I just love him. And I love, like I said, Clementine in the game too.
Do you guys have any experiences with video games and playing, characters that, I guess the default video game character is white, but, George?
So here's the thing, and not to veer off from your question, but when Bree brought it up, in my head was shouting the fact that there was a TikTok that I saw a very incredibly long time ago talking about main characters that you can relate to or something like that. And in my head, it was something like, I wonder how many main character video games, and I play a preposterous amount of video games. I don't talk about it on my channel because people get nasty about video games. The only reason why, as much TV as I watch, I play that much video games, just to bear in mind. And I had such an incredible amount of time. He's laughing because there's so much TV I watch. I had an incredible amount of difficulty finding a black main character on a video game. Like it was like I'm going to Google, like roll up my sleeves going into Google to find. I can find lots of characters. In fact, ones that I can very deeply relate to, black characters. So they are there. It's just having that main black character, which I think is a shame because, when just like any medium, you play it, you experience it because you want to be able to have it relate to you. I was playing Final Fantasy. I think it's 14. No, I think it's like 14. No, it's 13. And one of the characters saw, it's a whole thing. His little kid was like frozen in this like block of ice, and that's why he was going on the mission doing everything. And I was playing it with my son. And he was a little kid too. And my kids, even though they're biracial, they have that biracial fro. And like at the very end, his son comes like, with everybody else that got freed, and he's coming back and like looking at his dad and the arms open. I look over at my son, he has a little fro, and like the tears were just flowing. Tears were just flowing. And I'm like, that's the kind of experience that Black people, I don't want to say that Black people are looking for, but like to see characters that you can see and relate to, we want to see that on screen. But again, the amount of Black characters that I have, main characters on a video game, is criminally low. It is criminally low.
I can't overstate enough how seeing that representation is so important. And like as a kid, I didn't have that. I guess I related to Urkel. And like I would like that was my thing, but it just, the severe lack of representation in all that media was rough. And like,
you used to get excited when you see a Black kid on screen. You're like, oh, there's a Black kid.
It's
honestly, in all honesty, any brown character in general, because I mean, we were talking before the show a little bit about how, sometimes just like you just like see somebody and you just kind of immediately associate them as, whatever there's like race, like or ethnicity, like you closest identify with. And honestly, like I've, fallen victim to actually, misassociating certain fictional characters as certain as like ethnicities. I mean, it's like I always say, oh, thanks for educating me. I didn't realize that that's who they were interpreting that character as. Because just like in Rise of the TMNT, April has a friend by the name of Sunita. She's what they call a yokai, which are like the mutants of their universe. But she is like when she puts on her disguise, she gives off the image of an Indian woman. But I was like, I just saw, another like dark skinned teenage girl, and I immediately assumed she was Black. Certain video game characters, like I'm a big Street Fighter guy. There was a Street Fighter EX crossover that happened back in the 90s. There was a character in that named Duran. He was a giant, big, muscular brown dude, but I didn't even realize that he was supposed to be from the Middle East. Just like, because I just saw as though he was like a big brown guy, and I just assumed he was Black there as well. And just sometimes, like that token spot, they'll swap it out now from the token Black friend for like the token Indian friend. We've seen that, before in representation, not as, prevalent is like, or as popular that we would like to see in like the Big Bang Theories, or, a little bit better in, shows like Phineas and Ferb with Baljit. And so
which is still used as an online slur. Like I remember when I popped in on TikTok like back 2020, 2021, people would pop in and just comment Baljit and be like, oh
wow,
okay.
That's great.
It's just it's the weirdest thing. But it sucks because the creator of Phineas Ferb, like somebody asked him about that, like why did you make Baljit like this, blah blah blah, and he's like, I didn't mean anything by that. And I think it's like it's a combination of a couple of different things, but also like people will take whatever and make it bad if that's their intent to make it bad, even if it's a good character.
I say, were any of you guys on TikTok during the whole Night Skins incident?
What's the Night Skins?
Oh, with the moon or whatever.
I say with Tony Weaver Jr. Like somebody like tweeted something and they were referring to Black people as Night Skins, and so he took that and was like, Night Skins is way too cool of a name to be used as a slur. And then so Black people for like the next month on TikTok were just like repurposing it, making memes about it. They were establishing lore. That was one of the better moments, like circa 2022 TikTok. Unforgettable moment.
So going back to kind of what you said about like how important representation is, I feel like the term like representation matters sounds so like, I don't know, sometimes it sounds very like overused and cheesy, but like it really is, I think, an important thing. And like one of the things that frustrates me so much is like if a movie comes out, specifically speaking about horror movies, because that is like my main thing that I do and watch and talk about, but like if a horror movie, especially if it's like a reboot or something like that, if the cast in the original one was like majority white, which is largely the case, specifically with like old slasher movies and stuff like that, which I watch a lot. If the reboot cast is more diverse, whether that's black, Asian, brown, gay, whatever, all of a sudden it's, oh, this is just woke for like a not majority, but like a chunk of people. They're just instantly like, oh, this is just woke. I'm not going to watch it. When really it's like people, there are fans of horror specifically that have gone through decades of horror movies and don't see themselves on screen. So it is nice when you do see someone like my favorite franchise is Scream, but that franchise up until recently has been largely white. I still love the movies, but whenever Scream 5 introduced Mindy and Chad, the twins, I specifically like I loved Mindy because I felt like she, first of all, loves horror movies. She looks similar to me, or I look similar to her, and she's in my favorite franchise. And so she automatically became one of my top characters because I was like, oh, this is like seeing myself in a Scream movie.
Hey, Brie, can I ask you a question really quick?
Yeah.
So, as kind of like the resident horror fan on this show right now, not to say that that anybody else doesn't like horror here. How do you personally feel about this new kind of subgenre where it's like featuring more predominantly black casts in these horror like films, but they're more of a commentary and kind of deconstructing what specifically black horror kind of means to the landscape versus just giving us a more traditional horror film that just so happens to have a predominantly black cast. For example, like the Get Outs of the world. What was that other film that just came out? Came out last year. It was kind of a parody. They were playing the video.
Oh, The
They were playing
Blackening?
the board game. The Blackening,
Blackening, yeah.
And they
Yeah.
had all those like different subcategories of different black people you see in media.
Mhm.
How do you feel about that?
I love Jordan Peele as a horror director. Like Get Out, it was actually the 7-year anniversary yesterday for Get Out. But that's one of my favorite horror movies, and I remember seeing it in theaters. Like it was like a packed theater, and so like it was just like one of those really great theater experiences where everybody's reacting to everything at the same time, and everybody's just having such a good time. And I loved his movies. Like I think The Blackening was probably one of my favorite movies in general last year, and it was like one of those situations again because it was made by black people behind the camera and the writing or writing it too. I felt like it just felt like it was, I mean, it's a movie for everyone, but I also felt like being a black horror fan, like there were things in there that specifically I could appreciate that maybe someone who isn't black doesn't necessarily appreciate in the same way, if that makes sense. Like there were just certain jokes and stuff like that. Um, there was that whole scene where like they're trying to like name black people that have been on Friends. And
Uh-huh.
as someone who does like Friends, it still was like a hilarious joke because like there's not a lot of diversity on that show. And it was just something like, I don't know, I just was able to connect with that. And my mom and we watched it together too. And she loved Friends, but she also thought that part was funny because it's true. And again, it was just like, I think you can tell the difference between a predominantly black horror film that is made by black people versus a horror film that has black people in it that's written by someone who's not black.
Yeah,
Now I
that's
want to know
awesome.
your
I
thoughts on
totally
We Were
agree
on
with you
Break.
there. Sorry, what did you say, George?
I was being smart. I said, now I want to know what her thoughts are on the We Were on Break thing.
Oh, that's funny. But like going back to what I was saying, I had a very similar and shared experience with my uncle, who I watch a lot of movies with, and we actually had a very hilarious bonding moment over Scream 5, one of your favorite films, Brie. And it was the scene. It was at the house party, if I'm remembering the Scream movies correctly. And it was when Chad's at the time girlfriend was trying to get him to sneak off so that way they could go fool around or whatever. But this is like right towards the end of the film when like everything's about to pop off and go off like at this party and people are going to start dying. And he is like, we just watch Chad like he's making out with her. He's like, well, actually, I think I want to stay down here, where all the people are. And we were the only two that audibly busted out laughing. Mind you, we were the only two black people in that theater. And it
Yeah.
was just, just one of those hilarious things. Because I think it was Kenna the Mouse Slayer on TikTok. She
Mm-hmm.
had brought up that it's like the intersectionality of what it means to write horror for black people. And, about to say just like the things that we find scary is like in reality versus the things that white people specifically find scary are in the abstract. And I just really kind of wanted to kind of highlight that and bring up this about to say like just kind of that talking point. So thank you.
Yeah, and also just like another quick like a character like a movie I didn't watch in childhood, but I watched a couple years ago was The People Under the Stairs, which is written and directed by Wes Craven, and more of his like lesser known, I guess, horror movies. But the main protagonist in it is a little black boy, and there's like commentary on like race and like class and stuff like that. And I just remember like Wes Craven's my favorite horror director in general, but I just remember thinking like how cool it probably would have been, you know, to be because I think it came out in 1990, so it was before I was born, but to be like a little kid, a little black kid, and be a horror fan and see this movie where there's a person that looks like you. Because I mean, I can't really name that many horror movies where the main protagonist is like a black child. So it was just that movie is just really cool to me. And, you know, the fact that it was also, like I said, written and directed by my favorite director. It's just, I always like to highlight that one if, you know, anyone ever asks me about like some of my favorite black horror characters, because I think that one, just like I said, kind of stands out a little bit, but it's also a little underrated, I think.
How'd you feel about My Soul to Take?
It's definitely not my favorite. It kind of makes me sad that's the last movie that he directed or wrote rather before he passed away, because I don't think it's great, but you know.
How do you guys feel about the idea that they used to perpetuate, essentially saying like representation isn't needed because we can just have all white casts because everyone can identify with white people, but not everyone can identify with black characters.
The author Lemony Snicket, he wrote this piece one time, and one of the quotes sticks out to me where he was like, having a slice of cake doesn't seem very important. Everybody having a slice of cake doesn't seem very important if you've already eaten. And you're like, oh, well, yeah, that's pretty cool of you to be able to like, yeah, we can all see ourselves in there. And you're like, yeah, of course you do, buddy. of course you're like, no, they have a nerd, they have a jock, they have it. It's like, no, they have white people. I'd like to see somebody who's like my kind of nerd, my kind of jock, you know. And it's not to say that you couldn't watch television and see a character and have there be characters that don't necessarily look like you and you relate to, but there almost inherently will be a difference in your experience than them, as opposed to you experiencing a whole lot closer because of those things.
There's only one black Ghostbuster. And we can talk about, we don't need to dive too much into it. He's the only one who's not a scientist. But he was written with a more expanded role until when they meant it for Eddie Murphy, but they cut it down when it was just
Ernie Hudson.
Ernie Hudson. What? So when Ernie Hudson got cast, what's up?
I said, I got you.
Yeah. No, for some reason I was blanking because Ernie Hudson looks very similar to my dad. And in my head growing up, Ernie Hudson has always been like, he was on Heroes, and like when he dies on Heroes, I'm like, oh no. There's that added level of like connecting to a character that like maybe looks like people that you know, that you're close with. And for, I guess, anyone out there, I'm a non-black person of color, so like it's not an exact thing with Ernie Hudson, but like my dad looked closest to Ernie Hudson growing up. And that was
I can't believe we've been on here this long and haven't talked about the trope of, you know, the black person being the one that dies off first. We had like a whole discussion about horror movies, and that's kind of crazy.
I mean,
it wasn't my air, but I 1,000% thought you were going to bring it up.
It comes to mind, area, right, when you were talking horror, which is a little bit different now than it used to be. Bree, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what was really funny to me about The Blackening is like I think that was the tagline. It was like, we can't all die first.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, which is like, yeah, I mean, because literally the entire cast, I think, except for like a cop character, is literally all black. So it was like, yeah, what's gonna happen? But I do think it's I think it's getting a little bit like better. I think because it's like there's so much acknowledgement about like that stereotype that the black character dies first. Which kind of this is kind of related, kind of not, but like that's why the character Carla, and I Still Know What You Did Last Summer, played by Brandy. When I first saw it as a young kid, like even though like I don't think I had the like understanding of that stereotype that black characters always died first, but the fact that she ends up surviving the entire movie at the end was like insane like to me at the time. Like I was convinced that she was dead, and now that like I'm older and I'm looking at the whole genre, I'm like that was kind of like a pretty, in my mind, a big deal to have her character live at the time that movie came out. I know it was only like 1998, but still, like again, that wasn't really like happening a lot, I feel like, especially in slasher movies, which is usually when we see these characters getting killed off or just being like a side character that's literally just there to be killed off, or playing like a stereotype or something like that, like the sassy black best friend or something. But I do think that because again, the more we get people who like are black behind the camera, writing, directing, whatever, there's more of a chance for them to write characters that can survive throughout the entire movie and aren't just kind of there to be disposable.
LL Cool J, Deep Blue Sea. That also comes to mind, right? Doesn't he live till the end?
Yes, he was excited about it. Like I think in the movie he actually commented it, didn't he? Like he said something about it.
It's been a while. I get scared.
If
Also,
I recall correctly, I think he said something about it.
yeah, now that you said that too, I was thinking Busta Rhymes in Halloween Resurrection. He also lives to the end. Which makes me think about this whole like thing, which I always think about, which is funny, this like time where all these like rappers and hip hop artists were just like popping up in random slasher movies. I just think it's
We got to talk about Somebody Help Me with Omarion and Marcus Houston, bringing that back then.
What happened?
Oh, I don't think.
What was that?
Oh, there was like a horror movie. It was like a teen horror movie type of thing. And it's like, because like Omarion and Marcus Houston, they're kind of like Redman and Method Man of R&B, for those of you who are kind of missing the cultural context in that. And I mean, we mentioned Marcus Houston earlier, talking about his roles on Smart Guy and Sister Sister. But yeah, I mean, just because we're also talking about, I believe this was post You Got Served, which was like, the thing that kind of like made them household names, at least in terms of being black famous. And so just watching them, do this horror movie and then, them surviving at the end was just kind of crazy to me.
Yeah.
They even got a sequel, which was also was like baffling to me.
Does it tie into the fact that like back in the old days, like when you died in a slasher movie, it was because of a sin, right? Essentially, it was like you had premarital sex, you were doing drugs, or in a black character's, in that case, I guess the sin of not being white. That like
I think it also plays into the perpetuated stereotype and idea that black people just kind of lacked certain cognitive functions and abilities to be, perceived, at least on camera, as smart as white people. So it's just like you already have like the physical prowess and advantage in terms of, maybe natural born athleticism or just just good genetics from your like own family. And so they got to kind of nerf you in terms of making you not as smart.
Yeah.
And there's also a really good documentary called Horror Noir that kind of talks about and explores black horror movies, and just like from, the early black horror movies to like kind of, I think it came out like 2015, maybe somewhere around there. So I don't know. I always like to recommend that one if you kind of want to know more about specifically black horror, because I think it's just really interesting, and it kind of touches on like how things have changed, but also how there's still like space, obviously, to improve.
Could you say the title again, please?
Yeah, it's Horror Noir. I think it might be streaming on like Shudder, which is like the horror movie app, but it might be somewhere else too. But yeah, it's really good and interesting.
Oh, Horror Noir, History of Black Horror.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
Real quick, I wanted. I know I already talked about. I wanted to touch back on the because I thought of a really good example of what you had said about the idea of we could just have an all-white cast and still be represented. And I was thinking because I was like, I knew there was an idea that I brought up to somebody like explaining this recently. Bob's Burgers is one of my favorite shows, and I Bob is one of the characters I identify most with, of, his struggle with being a dad and having kids and trying to do right and everything like that. I talk about how, like, I identify with him so much. But there's also the show called Central Park that's kind of done in the same animation style. It's really good if you haven't seen it. It's almost like Bob's Burgers with more singing, if you can imagine. But the dad's black and the mom's white. And I'm black and my wife's white. And there's one of the episodes is their son has a minor incident, racism incident, but like, I guess him being biracial and also very like Gene, like very childlike. He didn't realize it, but the dad did. Like the two black guys there very clearly realized that what this white lady was scared of, this little boy with like a pirate hat and like a very clearly poorly made wooden sword, and was like clearly threatened. And they diffused it, but there was an episode where he had to have the conversation with him, like not his black son, but his biracial son, who probably honestly never thought about being black or white, And that's the kind of thing where I'm like, that is a very specific thing that I wouldn't get from Bob's Burgers. I'm so sorry. I don't think in Bob's Burgers they would be able to have that episode very well,
Yeah. I think. No, I got nothing. I'm with you.
Sorry, that was a downer, guy.
No. Okay. Are there? Let's hit something that I wanted to talk about, and that's race swapping, where people get very upset when you take a character in a reboot and you make them a different race than what was originally written. When they make Jimmy Olsen black, suddenly there are a million Jimmy Olsen fans out of the blue. Who would have known? Let's start there. You guys have any recent examples of race swapping? I know Johnson specifically, like April O'Neil, and the argument of whether it was race swapping or not, or what was originally intended or not. And, I don't know what the most recent controversy is. I'm trying to think of like what's happened.
I remember there was the thing with the Little Mermaid.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
That was one big one, but
definitely up there. I was actually just having a conversation with a friend of mine about that movie.
Let's talk Little Mermaid. We did a podcast episode on Little Mermaid when it came out, and we touched on it and whatnot. But let's talk about the Little Mermaid controversy. Let's keep it pointed.
If I understand correctly, to me that was a classic case of they were like, we picked the best girl, like we picked the best one. We opened the casting call to everybody, and she won. We thought we just put a red wig on her and didn't be. I feel like, if I'm being honest with you, I don't think that they perceived that it was going to be that big of an issue until they started saying something, and then I feel like they just stuck by their actress, but I don't. That doesn't feel like one that was intentional to me. I think it was just the best girl walked on the one.
Yeah, I was gonna say it also kind of. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I was gonna say it also kind of reminded me back when Spider-Man: Homecoming came out and they cast Zendaya as MJ, and people kind of lost their mind over that because she wasn't a white girl with red hair, and even though they were like, her name's Michelle, like it's not the exact same character, but people still like were so upset by it.
I mean, let's get it out of the way. She is Mary Jane. She's just not called Mary Jane, but like,
right. She's
a Mary Jane variant, right? Like she's Michelle Jones. I hope they don't do like in the MCU suddenly a white Mary Jane shows up and he's in love, and it's like, I hope they don't do that. I don't think they would.
Yeah, but people still won't let Miles be Spider-Man. Like in their hearts, they still won't acknowledge. They're like, no, he's something else. You're like, no, he's Spider-Man.
I mean, and that's not even a race swap.
No, it's just, but the concept of it, or I'm not sure if you remember when Riri was first announced. I'm not sure if you remember that. Like everybody lost their mind. All they knew was, hey, Iron Man was there, and now there's a black girl, and she's succeeding him. No, and they just went bananas. And you're like, he still exists. He's just a protege. But like before the actual comic came out, and they showed like no, we're calling her Ironheart, but you're racist. The way to show your colors, you're racist. Like they people can't handle that concept or that idea of even passing down the mantle to somebody who doesn't look like that person, because nobody's got a problem with Wally West. Some people have a problem with Jon Stewart.
Yeah. People don't realize, people point out like, oh, why can't more superheroes be like Miles? Like, we all love Miles, but what people don't realize is, like, I was reading comics back when Miles was introduced in Ultimate Spider-Man. Peter died. Peter Parker died in Ultimate Spider-Man, and then Miles took on the mantle. People hated Miles. People, like, the amount of love Miles has now is the amount of hate Miles had back then. Like, it completely
I remember
switched.
I remember that. Him and Miss Marvel. Oh, do you remember when Miss Marvel first came out? When Miss Marvel became Captain Marvel, and then Kamala Khan was like, oh well, now I'll be Miss Marvel. People were just
they hated on two fronts. They hated on two fronts. They didn't want a woman being Captain Marvel. So when Carol Danvers moved up, and they didn't want Kamala Khan being Miss Marvel.
And like you said, the fans came out of the woodwork because nobody was talking about Captain Marvel. they had to go to Wikipedia to find out who they were mad about.
That's the thing about Captain Marvel himself, the original Captain Marvel, Marvel. Marvel didn't have any fans. That's why they killed him in like the 70s.
Yeah, like she was just Miss Marvel for the longest time. She got a haircut and people lost their minds.
Yeah, that yeah. Do you guys hear about the changing redheads and making them black? The conspiracy.
It's just hair.
Taking roles away from ginger actors.
I didn't hear about that, but it doesn't surprise me, sadly.
There's a whole conspiracy, like why are all the race swapped characters ginger characters that are then changed to black? I do think there might be a sociological nuance to it, but not the way like the conspiracy is that like essentially black actors are taking ginger roles. And where's the representation in that?
It reminds me of like a joke I saw though a while on Twitter ago, and it was like basically talking kind of similar about that, and they were like, calm down, like redheads, you still have Chucky as your representation, and I always think about that.
I'll say the doll or Chucky Finster.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh,
hey, double
which
dose.
Chucky were you
Everybody
talking about, Bree?
I was talking about, the horror one, of course, but yeah, I mean,
Chucky
that's true.
Finster.
Chucky Finster, yeah, that's also a good one.
Yeah.
Where's the conspiracy in that? All the redheads are Chucky.
That sounds hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, people don't also point out the fact that like how many actors dye their hair red.
Exactly, just like
stealing the roles of gingers.
Exactly, just like let's take a look at every single, let's say like German, Dutch, French, or English actor that's portraying let's say like these Irish people or these like Scottish people that traditionally have say just like these just like redheaded features.
Yeah.
No, it's clearly about white supremacy, right? It's very clearly about the idea that a person who is redheaded is inherently white, which isn't a real thing. Malcolm X was called red, right? Like don't tell them that. It's clearly about something where people perceive something as theirs, and then they're like, well, how dare you take something that is ours, is what that very clear response bias is about. Because nobody says boo when the character is blonde in the comics and then the person is brown haired in the show, because that happens literally all the time. A preposterous amount, because most people don't have that bright, shiny blonde hair of yellow that they write in the comic. And so when they're portrayed as like a brown haired person, nobody says boo.
Yeah. Do you guys have favorite black superheroes?
I mean, Static is definitely up there for me. Rubber Band Man is also up there for me. I mean, this is pretty much just going to be me kind of glazing the entire Milestone universe.
Yeah.
Was about to say like with that, I say like not trying to like really show DC favoritism like that, but I mean those were the characters that really like I saw first in terms of like motion media, animation, and movies. Is like we've been talking about Jon Stewart literally this entire show, and I mean like being introduced to Jon Stewart as the Green Lantern, like I was so confused as a child when I got to the comics. I thought that Hal Jordan was black. And some is like, and people were just when people kept telling me Hal Jordan is like, oh, why did they change his name to Jon Stewart in the Justice League cartoon? That seems really weird. And then I actually picked up a Justice League comic book where I'm like, oh, there's like an entire core, and then there's several people with this title and mantle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I am not like a super big superhero person. I love Spider-Man though. I've loved Spider-Man since like the Tobey Maguire movies. So honestly, I'd probably say like Miles Morales. I love both of the what are they called? The movies that the
Spider-Verse,
animated
yeah.
movies that came out. Yeah, Spider-Verse. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love both of those, and I love that character, which is why like I don't know, when I saw people getting really mad about he's not really Spider-Man, I was just like, I don't understand. Like he is Spider-Man, but again, like it is obviously something to do with white supremacy more than anything else when it comes to stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah.
Like I saw the movie Spider-Man. For me, a lot of the ones like, I feel like a lot of the best ones don't get as much screen time because like the big boys, the Iron Mans, the Supermans, the Batmans, you're like they're wealthier, incredibly naturally gifted, powerful white guys, and I feel like people like. I almost feel like I cling on to like some of the bigger black superheroes like real powerful just because I'm like that's the black like the Blue Atom or Icon. I'm like those are the real black
Blue Marvel.
Supermans right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Blue Marvel and Icon. I really love Icon's story by the way of like him being a very similar situation as Superman as far as being an alien, being stranded on Earth, but like during the South times with like slaves and whatnot and like being super, but not like obviously capable. Like I'm gonna roll everybody. He's just in that culture, and then him contrast with Rocket. I guess him being so old, he also has like very conservative values, contrasted with Rocket, his helper, who's also African American, who has more liberal values and having that kind of dichotomy. I really like that kind of story. I also really like Mr. Terrific because his power is being smart. Like he's not like, look at me, I've got this lightning. Look at me, I've got this. I'm physically have this prowess or something like that. It's like, no, I'm just really, really smart. Look at my orbs. Like that's black nerd representation right there. It's Mr. Terrific. And I'm not sure
to
if
be
you saw
fair,
the show.
Mr. Terrific's also an Olympian athlete. Just so you
Oh
know.
yeah, that's true.
He's just great.
But like, well, the awesome thing is he's not punching people though. He's like, yeah, I could, but like, look at this. I've got these really cool orbs and they fly.
Yeah. He's gonna be in Superman Legacy coming up.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah.
And I saw his representation a lot on the show Arrow, and I thought it was really well done. He was that actor, and I forget his name.
Echo Kellum.
Yes, everything he does, he never does anything bad. He's really good, and he really stood out to me as a great black superhero. I really like the man.
Did you ever see the sitcom with him and Dakota Johnson and Nate?
Yes, I did, and I love it.
What was it called? It was Kate. It was two names. It was like blah blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah about the brother and sister.
I don't remember, but I remember liking the F out of it and being very upset that it got canceled.
Yeah. I once saw a panel with the Arrow cast, and somebody asked Echo. They were like, "Hey, how do you braid your hair so quick between like your secret identity form and your Mr. Terrific form?" And he was just joking. He was like, "I just hit up Kid Flash to run in, do my hair, and run out." He's like, "Oh, okay, cool." I thought it was
It's called Ben and Kate.
Ben and Kate. That's right.
And also, speaking of him, he actually is on my list of like, I know you had the list of stuff that we were going to talk about. One of them was like stuff that you like of positive ones, modern day.
Yeah.
And he was on the show Grand Crew. And that is one of the best black shows I have seen in, I will say, decades. I'm not sure if any of you guys have seen Grand Crew. If you haven't, please go watch it. They canceled it. It absolutely snapped my heart in half because it was just a group of black people like friends, but it wasn't about them being black. It was just they were friends and they liked wine, and it was incredibly funny without. It was authentically black without like, look at me, like, yeah, like, oh, I'm black and we talk a certain way. They're like, no, we all have college degrees.
Yeah.
They're
I
like, we
saw
like
season
wine.
1. I didn't get to see season 2. I haven't seen it yet.
It was such a great show. And he's one of the main characters. I really like that a lot. I thought that was. I'm like, more shows like this, please.
Yeah. Are there really current, like anything current right now that's out that you guys that really resonate with you guys? Like George was saying, Grand Crew, even though it got canceled. That sucks. Yeah.
Last year, I was a really big fan of the. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before because wow, what is time? But the Gran Turismo movie, since we were also talking about black video game characters earlier, I mean, the Gran Turismo video game is historically just a racing franchise, like a driving simulator. But I mean, the entire plot about it was set around this black racer who plays the video game and then gets picked up by this company as a publicity stunt to actually race in a Grand Prix. And I promise you, the concept of it sounds really ridiculous, but this is one of the best video game adaptation films
Really?
of the last 10 years. Because it's just like, it starts off, very as expected, kind of B tier, just like, but then it gets really real, really freaking quickly. And just like the immersion of all the driving scenes blew my mind.
I skipped it. I saw the trailer.
I highly recommend that you spin the block on it, dude.
Okay.
Go back and watch Gran Turismo.
All right.
You will not be disappointed.
Okay. All right.
One thing last year, it's kind of like, it's not like full horror. It's like, I would say like horror adjacent, but it was like a limited series. I think it was on Amazon Prime, Swarm. It was like
How was that?
It was good. I loved it actually a lot. I want to rewatch it again, but it was co-created, I think, by Donald Glover, who of course did like Atlanta, which I also love that show. But Swarm, I specifically with horror movies and just in general, I just love movies where women, like the main character is a woman and like they are allowed to just be completely insane. And that's pretty much what the main character in Swarm is. She's just crazy and like a murderer. And Dominique Fishback, who plays the main character in that, is so good. Like, it's a shame that she didn't get any real attention in the award season for her performance. But I think it's like 8 episodes, something like that. But that was something that was really, really good in the last year or so that I've seen. And I like to recommend it if people haven't seen it.
You bringing it up unlocked in my head. I was like a very recent example of a modern. It's not even a black show. It's Star Trek, but I'm not sure if any of you seen Star Trek Discovery.
Yeah,
but like,
I know exactly what you're talking about, but like I haven't watched any of it yet. But I have seen the merchandise for it, and I want to grab some of the black characters.
I will say right now, if there's anything that is on your watch list, hit clear and put Star Trek Discovery. One of my mutuals, Commander Lieutenant Ray, she does a lot of Star Trek content, and she was talking about the show or whatever. And I remember there's like a controversy about people not liking the main character or whatever. I put it on because I've been promising, and then immediately after watching a couple episodes, I was like, I would say I'm mad at you for not making me watch it sooner, but you did tell me to watch it. Her hero energy is off. Honestly, I hate to say it, but anybody who doesn't like her must be racist. Like, just her level of strong black woman hero energy is off the chart. She is doing the thing. She is super smart, super athletic. She's doing the fight scenes. She has authentically black hairstyles and talks in a regular way where like she's not playing it up, but that's who she is. I enjoyed the heck out of that show, and having her be on the forefront of it and people treating her, I'm not going to say that sentence, treating her like other heroes get to be treated. That's also that.
Yeah.
Have you seen My Dad the Bounty Hunter?
I have not.
It's an animated series on Netflix. I don't know if it got picked up after its first season or not. But, I mean, so basically it stars the guy from The Boys who plays Mother's Milk. So he's an intergalactic bounty hunter, but he also has to take care of his 2 kids for the summer, and they accidentally end up sneaking onto his spaceship when he tries to just like, hey, I need you to watch the kids for a couple more weeks. I'll be back. And then I'll have them for the whole summer. I probably has to do one last mission. And so basically it's just like this really fun space adventure family bonding thing between this black dad and it's like and his daughter and son, and and the fact that it's set, in the outer parts of the universe, and we get to explore that. There was such this breath of fresh air in terms of there's like these kids allowing themselves to be kids, because there is no, all right, we need to have this conversation about how you as a black child need to act in public. We're on a freaking planet where there's cyclopses and people breathing fire and spitting acid. And so it's just like, but I say so these kids just got to be kids, and they didn't have to be black kids in that show. And it was a surprising delight, and I highly recommend it for anybody who hasn't watched it.
Have you guys watched Atlanta?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Atlanta.
I fell off. I got to get back into it.
It ended wild. Like,
yeah,
that final season where they would just do little short films as episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I'll check it out. I remember absolutely loving the show. That jail scene was so, and you can't even. There's so many funny, like really well done funny scenes in that show. It's a very well done show. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about
Elementary is good too.
Yes.
Yes.
And that doesn't get the label. I feel like, maybe I'm biased. I feel like even though it has the more than two black characters aren't related thing on there, that it doesn't get labeled specifically as a black show. Like, it's just a funny show that everybody loves because Quinton's a genius and I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's just something that's just like because I think it just appeals to a lot of people. Like, they can relate to it, and also like all the characters, even though there are more than one or two black characters, they're all so different, and they're not really like any specific stereotype. Like, they're very different from each other, which I think is cool too.
Yeah. I think the only way to really showcase how different characters are, let's just say black characters, and then through black characters, black people in general, right? Let's just say non-white people in the broader scope, because white representation has been there since however long, is having like all these characters. You have to like increase the volume of the characters out in media to be able to show like how each one is different. Winston and Coach are two different characters in New Girl. I was afraid they were going to make them the same when I watched like episode 2 when they switched them. And I'm glad that they weren't. They weren't sure what to do.
Like that's
with
what
Winston.
they were going to do.
Yeah.
It honestly
that's happened
looked like
before.
That's what they were going to do.
Right? That's happened before when they recast a character. I mean, I don't know if Terrence Howard, Don Cheadle counts, but like it's the same character.
The two most different looking black people playing the same character.
Well, Don Cheadle says he's like, it's me, get over it, right? Doesn't he say like that?
I mean, that's literally what happened in terms of how Don Cheadle actually went about getting that role, because there was an executive named Ike Perlmutter, and they were doing that whole thing where it was just like they brought it up to him like in the board meetings. It's like, well, what is it going to matter? Like, no one's going to be able to tell the difference.
Ike was an asshole, and I'm glad he's gone from Marvel. He was the one who said that Black Panther wouldn't sell. That Captain Marvel and Black Panther wouldn't sell. Black Panther was a phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all. I mean,
Black Panther was a whole thing for black people.
Yeah,
that was like a whole thing, and I think it was one of those ones where maybe I think a lot of people were excited for that representation, and it landed. And it's not that we had to give it extra points. We didn't have to give it any kind of extra leeway to be like, look, this is great. Oh, or ... They're like, no, this is the best one. This is the best one. Look at us.
And that's why DC fans are punching the air begging for a new Static project.
I mean, there needs to be a Static something. But not with Jaden Smith.
Honestly, Jaden would be a much better Aquaman, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. I've never heard that.
I want to hear more about this.
Yeah.
You piqued my interest.
I'd say Jackson Hyde Calderon.
Okay.
Just like he's got the look, he's got the swagger. He has a very in the fact that from Young Justice, Calderon, in the earlier seasons, he has that very more demure, poised, sophisticated way that he just like talks about things. Jaden Smith really presents himself just like that to the public eye when he does step back into the spotlight with whatever he's like presenting and touching, and he just has like kind of like that otherworldly presence to him almost. So I feel like it's kind of an actual kinship there. I don't know how he really feels, about like being in the water like that, but I mean, just like in terms of when he had his locks, I'm just like, if you dyed them gold, he was already kind of halfway there.
Also, can I say, just bringing up Aqualad, and I don't know how we didn't talk about him before, but like me watching Young Justice with my kids, I can see that they look at him the same way that I used to look at John Stewart.
Yeah.
Like, wow, look at that representation of like, he's the reasonable one. He's the, the strong one. He's definitely not the black one, but like he stands out. Like that's some good representation. I could tell that they looked at him the same way I looked at John Stewart.
Yeah. As we bring this episode to a close, I want to thank you guys so much for coming on this. I don't know if you guys have any final thoughts. This is not a subject that could be wrapped up in a podcast episode, right? Whole I don't know. You wouldn't even need a whole series. You need life. This is just life. Do you guys have any final thoughts? Characters you like, characters you didn't like, just thoughts about the overall idea of representation, anything really that you wanted to close up with?
I just want to say from the horror perspective that I always get excited when there's like a horror movie coming out, even if it's something I'm not actively interested in. But if I see that there's some diversity behind the camera or it's a diverse story, I always want to try to check it out. And so my hope specifically for the horror genre is that they continue to have more diversity, more representation behind the camera. I mean, like I said, that's why I love Jordan Peele, and I think he's doing really great work right now within the horror genre, and I hope that continues, but I also hope other people are able to get opportunities to tell different stories, because, it's just nice to see different perspectives, and, again, I think it is, I don't want to say better, but it is more of an authentic experience if something is written by the person that has experienced these things and has lived in that or has existed in that community, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Anyone else?
One of the things I wanted that we had prepped was characters who aren't black that black people claim.
Yeah.
I was gonna like definitely Piccolo is on the list. I don't care what anybody. I don't get anybody says Piccolo's on the list. Also, I don't hear a lot of people say this, but Cleon, like not just Worf, but I think Cleons in general, like to me from Star Trek.
Oh, Klingons. Yeah.
Yeah, Cleon. To me, I'm like, they're black. Those are black people.
It's weird. I think Klingons were like originally Russian, allegories. Like each of those other races were like China, I think was Romulans. I don't know. Anyway,
you'd have to ask Lieutenant Commander Ray about it.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying. I do agree that I think they were something else, and then like to me, I think they shifted a little bit to to now where I'm like,
but now those are black people. They brown faced all those white actors back in the days.
They did. They brown faced hard, and they were super okay with it. I also have Skeeter from Doug.
Skeeter from Doug, yeah. I thought you were gonna say Cousin Skeeter because I loved Cousin Skeeter, but he's.
I agree, Cousin Skeeter was.
Who's arguing that he wasn't?
Some incels like, well, actually, if you look at the allegory, you're like, all right.
Puppets aren't black.
Just a side note that I just wanted to bring up is when people draw human versions of the Lion King characters, but they're white. Simba, Nala, like why? What are they? I don't know. It irritates me.
Like, yeah, my name's Rafiki. All right, Rafiki.
Ralph Feeke. That is Ralph Feeke is nasty word. Okay. That caught me off guard. I'm sorry. But if I can chime in, before we finish up, Sorry, getting my composure. A wise person once said, "I'm rooting for everybody black." So in terms of black stories, best like in the writers' room, black stories behind the camera, black stories for black characters. I mean, I'm here for it all, and especially for the representation. Not just for seeing yourself on screen, but just in terms of the other spaces where that translates to, like merchandising. Because a little big thing about myself, I'm an action figure collector. Obviously, my Ninja Turtles collection is my biggest and most pristine thing. But I also have an entire subcategory of black action figures that I call the culture set, and it's gotten to the point where it's just like I'm running out of certain black characters because they just haven't been making them. So I had to take the liberty of making them myself. Like this is a custom Samuel L. Jackson from the film Coach Carter, because this is one of my favorite films that he starred in.
That
And
is
it's
so
like
cool.
I painted this using a Nick Fury body.
That's cool.
So it's just like, yeah, if you go back and Google it, and it's just like, this is a Mace Windu head from a Star Wars figure. And then, so that's what I do in my free time.
That's cool.
If
Thank you.
Yeah, I never thought I would ever see a Coach Carter action figure.
Now you have.
Awesome.
And you can check it out on my Instagram page at Johnson Collects, because that's what I do.
Awesome.
Cool.
I want to just like real quick talk about how I just wanted to mention, as I'm watching Avatar, whatever people think about Avatar, I mean, we're going to do a podcast episode tomorrow on it, but like the fact that like Avatar, the cartoon and the live action thing explore like this like almost like East Asian but also indigenous cultures and like representation through that. I like the idea of just stories moving away from a European medieval times. That's just a thing. Like, I'm tired of knights in shining armor. Like, there's all that. Like, Shogun is coming out. There's Avatar. There's also the animated series Iwaju, which takes place in a futuristic Lagos, Nigeria. And, like, that's a Disney animated series coming out. And the idea...
There's also a series about Hannibal that I believe Denzel Washington is attached to.
Which Hannibal?
The one that invaded Rome.
Oh, the one who went on elephants through, like, the
Yeah.
Himalayas? Okay. Denzel,
I heard that joke
Denzel is
first.
playing Hannibal? What'd you say?
I said Burris. Like I said Burris because you're like, which animal? I was like,
Well, I thought Hannibal.
Hannibal Lecter.
Hannibal Lecter. Yeah. Thanks for reading what that was.
Hello, Clarice.
But like, I want exploration of other cultures and other things, and like, Iwaju looks like. I hope it's good, because that's the type of stuff. Like Black Panther was that Afrofuturism, and like, Iwaju looks like it's gonna be in that like subgenre, which is cool. You know.
that's one of the reasons why one of my favorite shows is Bob Loves Abishola, because it's a rom-com type of sitcom, but like a very strong African influence and talk about their food and their culture and the little differences. And I absolutely love that it has that, like you said, it's not knights in shining armor, it's not the normal fare, it's exploring other cultures in that type of romantic. We love a will they won't they in a sitcom, and you're like, well, with a little bit of an African spin on that.
What's the show with Schmidt and Cedric the Entertainer?
The Neighborhood.
What's it called?
I think it's called The Neighborhood.
In the Neighborhood. I keep seeing clips and like it looks cool, but I feel
It
like
is. It's
Bob Love Hart, Abishola, and that show did not have good like trailers or whatever for the series, so I never gave them a shot.
Oh, get both of them. You'll be hooked. Bob Loves Abishola is very. You will just watch the next and the next and the next episode of how the romance blossoms is very sequential to like that's your day. The Neighborhood, both of them are just hilarious. They're doing their thing. They are doing their thing, and it's fun.
Okay, cool. I want to thank all three of you so much for coming out on this episode and talking with me and talking to others about your experiences, your thoughts, your opinions. Before we get going, where can people find you? What do you got coming up? Do you have anything to plug? Right now is the time. Johnson, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, you can find me at all social media at Johnson is Lovely. Like I said, I also have a secondary Instagram page called Johnson Collects. I do a lot of stuff, around Black History Month where I show off the Culture set, which is my Black action figure collection. That's it. I'm also a part-time musician, full-time creator. So it's just like also just check out the YouTube channel. I got a bunch of fun stuff, just like checking out there. And all of my music's on Spotify, so I'd really appreciate that. Links, in my bio if you go to any of my pages.
Awesome. You do too much, man.
That's like I got to get to the money, bro.
Yeah, I get it. George, where can we find you? What do you got coming up? Anything you want to plug?
Well, it's you can find me on TikTok. That's if you look at me on any other app, you're like, that's just a repurposed TikTok. So that's where you can find me. It's Game Time 2. I do theme weeks, as you know, so like it'll be like videos all about one TV show a week, and I do a preposterous amount of videos. Like usually it's about 5 videos a day. This upcoming week is Ted Lasso. I'm actually wearing like a shirt from Ted Lasso, and it's my one. I think it might be my favorite show. So like I'll probably be doing like 10 videos every day on there. I think next month is Dark Crystal, Legion, Fargo, and BoJack Horseman. So if those are shows that you're interested in, you think he's like, how do you do so many videos today? I have nothing else to do.
That's way too like the fact that you said you play as much video games as you watch TV. I'm like 48 hours in a day.
You both at the same time.
Okay.
Like that line on Office Space, 2 at the same time now. So if you like TV content, talk about sitcoms, analyzing stuff about like certain scenes and certain things, give me a follow.
Awesome. And Bree, where can we find you?
I'm on TikTok and Instagram, Bree Hearts Horror. I will say I'm much more active on TikTok. Make like reviews. I basically just talk about horror movies 9 times out of 10. So reviews, just using like silly audios, stuff like that. I'm also on Letterboxd, but I will say my reviews are pretty much never serious. They're very like stupid one-liners. But I'm on there under Chef Boyar Brie. If you want to follow me there.
Is it Chef Boyar Brie BREE or BRI?
BRIE.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, I made that letterbox a long time ago before I started going by Brie without the E. So, and you can't change it on letterbox. So,
yeah, Yep. Okay, all right, Chef Boyar Brie. I wasn't expecting that. There's 2 things that surprised me today: Chef Boyar Brie and the Coach Carter action figures. So, great. I want to shout out everybody in our YouTube chat or Twitch chat. Twitch is Top Shelf Gaming. Shout out to Top Shelf Gaming, and shout out to Modern Merlin out there. Modern Merlin did chat saying that Night Skins is a full homebrew D&D race because of Neo Soul God.
Oh, okay.
I don't know all the words that are in that, but like I assume that makes sense to at least one person. But thank you everybody for coming on. Thank you everybody out there for watching. Definitely follow Bree, follow Johnson, follow George. If you want to follow the Keeg, you can follow us on Instagram and TikTok at The Keeg Show. We're also on Facebook and Twitter and Threads and all that at The Keeg Show / The Keeg Show, whatever. If you're watching us live, you're watching us on twitch.tv / The Keeg Show or youtube.com / The Keeg Show, or you're listening to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. We're all over the place. Like, comment, subscribe, follow, write a review, hopefully a really good review. Let us know that you're out there, that you're listening, that you're watching. This is the Keeg Talks. It's a different topic every single week. This week, we technically have 2. We're talking Avatar tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. But we also have a weekly Thursday comic talk that we do as well as a monthly X-Men catch-up called State of X. So, a lot of shows out there for you guys to watch and or listen to. That's pretty much it. Thank you guys once again for being on here. Thank you guys so much for watching. Once again, I'm your host, Dimithri Perera, and this has been the Keeg Talks Black Characters in Fiction. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Later.
T-H-E-K-double-E-G. T super